Okay. I think, yeah, let's get started. Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to our Resilience Hub event for the Nairobi Work Programme. My name is Joanna Post. I am the team lead of the Nairobi Work Programme and very excited to just recently taken on the role. So I am a face that you will see a lot more of moving forward. Thank you very much. This is my first gig as Nairobi Work Programme team lead, so I'm very happy to be here. I, of course, send apologies from Johanna Nalau, who is actually down to moderate today, but she has a few problems that many of us are dealing with at COP27, so she's not feeling so great today. So you have me instead, and we have, this event is really organized by the Nairobi Work Programme, which is the UNFCCC Knowledge to Action Hub on adaptation and resilience. So it's really about addressing knowledge gaps for action-based adaptation, or adaptation action. So it's been a busy week. So last year's COP, the Nairobi Work Programme Forum was held to engage parties and partners to support cross-learning to address knowledge gaps on biodiversity and ecosystems. So as many of you know, the Nairobi Work Programme looks at particular themes every year, and over the last year, it's really deep dived into biodiversity, to ecosystems, and addressing gaps around knowledge in that. So we've got a great panel today to really look at what's been happening and how some of those gaps are being addressed and where we should go moving forward. And what we really are trying to do with the Nairobi Work Programme moving forward is to create this framework where we can really look at some of the gaps that parties and you and observers are trying to handle, really. It's a tough topic, and the Nairobi Work Programme is really there to try and address some of that in response to our mandates under the UNFCCC, in response to party needs and regional needs, and catalyze really a framework for action moving forward. And we're strengthening, of course, the ties among communities of practice with local partners to really enhance adaptation. So without more ado, I would like to pass the floor to Tristan Tyrrell from the Convention on Biological Diversity, who will, he's a member of our expert group on biodiversity, and we are just getting to know each other, but excited to work together now, and I will pass the floor to you. And there's only one working mic, so we're going to have to really work as a community and share.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the invite. I just want to say thank you very much to the organizers for putting a roof on this pavilion. Actually, it helps. Sorry to be keeping you away from whatever party that is over there. My name is Tristan Tyrrell. I'm the Program Management Officer for Biodiversity and Climate Change at the CBD Secretariat. I am new in the job, hence why I think people are waiting for me to arrive, even though I was just standing over there. No one knows who I am, but hello. So the CBD Secretariat is a member of the Nairobi Work Programme expert group on biodiversity and climate change. We have been supporting to the extent possible on providing advice, guidance where possible, and also contacts linked to, in particular, the forests and grasslands ecosystems. One of the big things, of course, that we're trying to do now with our own COP happening in the next couple of weeks is to get the Global Biodiversity Framework, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, finally over the line, adopted, agreed, and then implementation to start as soon as we can after that. Climate change within the context of the CBD has gone down a bit of a winding road. It's certainly been recognized as one of the drivers for biodiversity loss, and we've seen and we've heard recently just how devastating that biodiversity loss has been over the past few decades. Climate change itself, though, hasn't necessarily been recognized in terms of, or sorry, the other way around. Nature, biodiversity, hasn't been recognized quite so well about how it plays in helping us to address climate change. If you look at the Aichi targets, climate change related targets are very much about threats, not so much about nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based approaches, the benefits that can arise from effective conservation and restoration. That is starting to change. Within the current framework, there is a target 8, that is very much looking at the link between biodiversity and climate change in both directions, still looking at it as a threat, because it is one of the key drivers of biodiversity loss, but also to look at it as how effective conservation, effective restoration, effective sustainable management of biodiversity and ecosystems can help us to adapt and mitigate climate change. There are some issues that need to be resolved in the negotiations, mostly around terminology. Nature-based solutions, it's certainly being picked up in certain fora quite extensively. Both here and within the CBD, there has been certain hesitancy, shall we say, in terms of its actual use. I mean, we saw that in Glasgow last year, and we're seeing it being reflected in the draft Global Biodiversity Framework text. We'll have to see whether or not the UNEA resolution and UNCCD COP15 decision actually changes that, but to be confirmed anyway. But it's either it's nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based approaches, irrespective of the terminology. The idea, the understanding, and the realization that effective conservation can support climate change, addressing climate change, both in terms of mitigation, but also helping us to adapt to it, is important. We need to be addressing it. We need to be really focusing on it. The question is how that is implemented, who the beneficiaries are, how they're being involved at all levels, who are the driving forces behind it, and what are their motivations. All need to be understood and ensured right from the very start. And there is a global standard on nature-based solutions, which is a good step in the right direction. But these haven't necessarily allayed the fears of certain constituencies, certain stakeholders, and they need to be recognised and considered in this. The issue, of course, in terms of the Global Biodiversity Framework is the extent to which that could undermine the entire process by not allowing us to have some sort of a consensus by the end of COP, by Christmas, hopefully, because we would like to have a bit of a break for Christmas if possible. That in order to get an ambitious global biodiversity framework by the end of COP in December. And then, like I mentioned, it's about implementation. And that's where programs like the Nairobi Work Programme really can be very supportive, looking at how to link NBSAPs, the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans under the CBD, with equivalent policy processes under UNFCCC, such as the nationally determined contributions, such as NAPs, how these all are linked, how the right people are in the room when they're being developed, and then ultimately when they're being implemented, and trying to bring CBD focal points and sort of technical expertise under CBD with the equivalent under UNFCCC in order to see that proper synergistic implementation going forward. And hopefully we don't have a situation like we had with the Aichi targets, where a lot of enthusiasm back in 2010 when they were adopted, ultimately, however, apart from one or two, frankly, only partially achieved, we really didn't do as we set out to do. Similar to all the dire warnings that we're hearing in relation to climate change, we're also starting to hear them now, especially with ecosystem degradation and species loss, and we need to act, and we need to act now. I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Don't escape yet, because it says Q&A on here. Or we can have a number of speakers and then go back to Q&A. I think that might be might be a way to roll. Unless anyone has any urgent questions for Tristan, and I really resonate what you're saying about the importance of linking the CBD and the UNFCCC work, both at international level, so that our both our convention secretariats can support knowledge and find synergies there, but of course it needs to happen at national level as well, so that parties aren't, double. Is that a word? Double doing things, but finding synergies at national level to respond to both NBSAPs and NAPs. So very, very poignant there. And Nairobi Work Programme can certainly play a role in that knowledge sharing and that addressing of the gaps. So does anyone have any? I think because we only have one microphone in this room, maybe we'll invite the speakers to give their presentations, and then we'll work together using one microphone to do some Q&A. So thanks so much, Tristan. And we now have, there you are, Ambrosio up next. Ambrosio, like me, is a advocate for not just biodiversity, but don't forget, we have ocean and land biodiversity. So we're really working to think of the global whole when we're thinking about addressing biodiversity and thinking about the role of nature and putting nature at the center of some of our conversations rather than having an anthropocentric view of this. So Ambrosio is chair of the Technology Executive Committee and Deputy Director of Planning and Management Control in Chile. And I hope we'll share some of his experience from Chile about the work that you're doing and the tech. Over to you.
Thank you very much. As you can see, I have 3 separate set of notes that I will try to integrate in 5 minutes. First, the tech is very happy that we are invited to provide our experience in how the work within our work program can fit into a new rolling work plan of the TEC for the next 5 years. As you may know, the technology mechanism launched yesterday, the joint work program for the next 5 years. And we very much hope to engage with different constituent bodies and, of course, continue collaboration with the Nairobi work program. At the national level, and I'll be very brief, as you might know, Chile has one of the longest coasts, and also Chile is a huge fan of ocean action and commitments. We have that on our NDC. And we work, and right now, my capacity inside the country is on the NDE, the National Designated Entity of the Climate Technology Center and Network. And we develop a proposal to address one of these commitments, and this commitment related to how do you manage well the areas. I want to read a finding that, in a way, is a trouble finding, but provides some guidance in the latest IPCC Working Group 2 report. And it says, this finding is marine protected areas, as currently implemented, do not confer resilience against warming and heat waves and are not expected to provide substantial protection against climate impacts past 2050. However, marine protected areas can contribute substantially to adaptation and mitigation if they're designed to address climate change, strategically implement, and well-governed with high confidence. So this is a huge call, not only for action, but to revise the way some things have been done in the past and do it well in the future. And that's the core part of this fast technical assistance request, because we want to actually comply our commitment in a way that's useful to address the challenges by climate change. And this then connects very nicely into the new rolling work plan of the DC, because one of the main actions where we will seek collaboration with the Nairobi work program is actually the activity that we have in oceans that has that exact same focus about how also in contributing with a very strong synergy to the SDGs 14 that has a commitment, if I recall correctly, is around 10% of marine protected areas. I guess it was from 2020. I don't recall the commitment for 2030. So this kind of work is not only for one specific country. We're talking about a huge impact. If that commitment is implemented, you have protected at least that amount of ocean space. We already have a really strong work that we presented on Ocean Day during this SB. I will not repeat that work because also probably we all are very familiar with it. It was an input to the work on the global goal on adaptation during the previous week and this week. we really like the way it was formulated and the way we collaborated with, of course, the Network Work Program, also FEBA, and also IUCN. And yesterday, we had the meeting with IUCN to see how we can collaborate in different areas for the next rolling work plan. So one that seems to be very clear is, of course, continue this strong work on oceans, and maybe provide this specific focus on this that's very well aligned with a full commitment under the SDG 14. But also we have contemplated work on emerging transformational adaptation technologies, and that we want also to address the finance part of it. This came as a request from the Green Climate Fund to ATC. They wanted to work with us because it's not easy to how to encapsulate adaptation technologies with finance because of the local context and the different changes, less standardized in general that you can find in mitigation. And also we have work on the water food nexus that we're contemplating with you, among other areas. So this is, in a way, we hope, a first step in a continued process of collaborating with the Network Work Program in different set of areas that we find in common interest with the technology aspect on their side, and of course, within all the framework that you have. So thank you very much for the invitation and opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you. Round of applause for Ambrosio, thank you. And actually, Ambrosio, if you don't mind staying there, because we will end up with a panel. So you can sit back. We'll have a panel at the end. I think that's easier in here with the logistics. So and very interested to hear about your support and the technology options and the finance. And it's worth bearing in mind when it comes to adaptation finance, as Working Group 2 pointed out, that only 4% of climate change finance that's currently changing hands goes towards adaptation. The rest goes towards mitigation. So we're talking not just about an adaptation finance gap, but a massive adaptation finance gap. And that's one of the things I think that we can really help have discussions about moving forward. So without more ado, thank you so much, Ambrosio. We will pass the floor to Veronica Lowe, who's the Senior Policy Advisor at IISD. And I forgot to ask you your question, so apologies, but I will ask Veronica her question, which is on the agenda, which is, are there specific ways countries can strengthen synergies between adaptation planning and protecting biodiversity? So Veronica, over to you.
Sure, thank you very much, and I'm very thrilled to be here. It was lovely to be part of the biodiversity expert group, along with other organizations, and also great to be here on Biodiversity Day, so happy Biodiversity Day. I'm going to share some findings from a report that was developed as part of the Biodiversity and Adaptation Thematic Working Group. So we developed this under the guidance of the Nairobi Work Program and the Least Developed Countries Expert Group, together as a joint collaboration between IISD, GIZ, CBD, UNEP, SWEDBio, in addition to the NAP team and other members of the Biodiversity Expert Group. And in this technical brief, what we do is we emphasize the interconnections between biodiversity and climate change and explore the potential to foster synergies between national planning instruments such as national adaptation plans under the UNFCCC and national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or NBSAPs, under the CBD. And some findings that we have and some specific actions that we pulled out from analyzing different case studies and looking at entry points for synergies was regarding, just as you mentioned, Joanna, opportunities for joint analysis of financing instruments, for example, by prioritizing and combining financing for solutions with both biodiversity and climate change benefits, and by earmarking climate funding to NBS, nature-based solutions in particular, we can go a long way towards addressing these interrelated crises of biodiversity, global biodiversity loss, and climate change as well. And we can also address this from a policy perspective. We know that most countries are still in the process of formulating their NAPs, and at the same time, countries are revising or updating their NBSAPs, particularly to align with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to be negotiated on and hopefully adopted later on at CBD COP15. And there are clear opportunities here to leverage the two processes to integrate adaptation and biodiversity actions in planning and implementation. And there's also needs for wild multi-stakeholder engagement and also multi-governance processes to ensure that we can integrate local and subnational efforts as well into national adaptation and biodiversity conservation agendas. This includes championing locally driven approaches and enhancing the availability of information and knowledge among local actors on integrated solutions to climate change and to biodiversity loss. And a specific country case example here on financing, for example, that we looked at was a case study of a national fund in Rwanda, which is an autonomous institution to further scale up resource mobilization and allocation. It was established in 2012, and it's called the National Fund for Environment, or the Rwanda Green Fund. And with this fund, which is the largest of its kind in Africa, it continues to attract a lot of investment. And the focus here is on protecting the environment, actions for conservation, restoration, but also climate change mitigation and adaptation. So I'll stop there, and I'll give the floor back to Joanna for the next part of the agenda.
Thank you so much, Veronica. And I'm hearing very much this importance of co-production of knowledge to bring together the biodiversity and the climate conversations at a country and subnational level within the conversation, and that's a really interesting example. So I feel like after COP I have a lot to read up on. So we, just to clarify, what I'll do is, because of the fact we only have one mic in the room, we'll hear from all the speakers and we'll do a Q&A at the end and bring everybody back to the front. So in the agenda now we have two speakers. We have Bea from the TNC, who's in the room, and we have Chris Magero, who's online. Chris, hello. And we will ask both speakers to speak around, based on the recent science, what do we need to do, or what do we need to be doing differently to sustainably utilize and conserve our biodiversity and ecosystems, and how does this translate into transformative adaptation action? So Bea, I will invite you up to the front and pass the microphone to you first of all, and then Chris will pass to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. And big honor to be here. I have to say that I'm a big fan of the Nairobi Working Program. I think the program does an amazing job bringing information to coastal communities, but at the same time also supporting information at the global level. So I really love that local to global cooperation, and just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. So going back to the question, I think what we've been seeing, the science telling us, is that for the past 50 years, the ocean has been absorbing a lot of heat. And as a result, the ocean is becoming warmer, more acid, and losing oxygen. So what this means is for the ocean is that now the ocean is less livable for marine species, but at the same time, it means that for people living on the coast, sea level rise and storms will increase. Just to put it into context, around 1.9 billion people and over half of the world's megacities are on the coast. Meaning that more frequent extreme events like hurricanes and so on will inflict into more destruction. Some small islands may even become unlivable, as we know. So in this context, as was already said here in this event, nature has a big role to play for both mitigation and for adaptation. Now we need to bring finance so nature-based solutions can play a big role in this process. But I think equally important is to have the local communities that actually depend on these ecosystems and live on these ecosystems to have full ownership of the projects that are being developed and implemented in this place. And I think Joe, back to your answer. I think that's what we should be doing differently. I wanted to share an example of something that makes me excited. It's an example of a project that TNC and other partners have been developing since 2008 to support and strengthen the capacity of the Lamu communities in Kenya to protect, manage, and restore priority mangroves. So since 2008, together with women's groups, TNC has been supporting mangrove restoration in Kenya. These actions in general will help to reduce threats to mangroves, also increase biodiversity, and community livelihood, and of course have climate benefits. One improvement that the women have already seen is in terms of numbers of wildlife. So crabs in these ecosystems are a big component of food security. And we've been seeing that the populations of crabs is already increasing. So that's something to celebrate. And for the women, they are also experiencing their own direct benefits. Women who remain active in the association are invited to join a number of microfinance groups through which they can apply for loans and start sustainable businesses. So this is an example of how we can use nature but also empower local communities so they own the project and they benefit from the project. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Bea. So Chris, you're there. Tech works? Great. So Chris Magera is also in the biodiversity expert group of Nairobi Work Programme. Pleasure to meet you, Chris. And the same question, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Just let me know if you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. And really nice to be here and to be part of this team again, the Nairobi Work Programme, and just to share a few insights. I mean, I will start by saying that, we are living in an unprecedented time of environmental and human crisis. And I will not paint the picture because I know most of us already understand it. But following, on from the biodiversity report that was out last year, the Global Land Outlook report that, tells us we are losing 0.25 of all primary forests every year. We are losing, 25 to 35 of global grasslands are being degraded. And this is, coming from the reports. The IPCC report this year, I know most of us were able to interact with and even saw the brief. That climate change is now rolling over the hills, almost unabated. We are in a time where we need to really think about this, quite keenly. Also in 2022 is that one point where drought came to the forefront, not just a drought in the Horn of Africa and in other drylands as we know them, but drought impacting Europe, impacting agriculture in Europe, impacting, production systems there. Food and water security around it, and with it also biodiversity and human well-being. It's in this year as well that, when we talk about the planetary boundaries and 6 of them that, tell us where we need to operate in to be sustainable, that 4 of them, have already gone over the limit. We live in quite unprecedented times. And the idea around it is not to say that their hope is gone, but there is a common thread to all this crisis that, as I can say, we can observe. There's a human element that is driving this process, whether it's at very local level or whether it's played within policies. It's manifest in the way we look at agriculture and other land uses changing. Pesticides are pollutants coming through. But again, also looking at it very simply, it's you and me. It's the role we play in the consumer decisions we make. 30%, for example, of food produced goes to waste around the world, from studies that were done recently. And we all know the role that land health plays. Healthy land is pivotal, to thriving biodiversity, thriving ecosystems, addressing climate change issues inter alia. One other thing that I'd like to point out is, with regards to the whole discussion on biodiversity, is grasslands communities specifically. They are commonly left out of the discussion, despite the fact that 54% of the earth can be classified as grasslands or rangelands in some way or the other. They're left to the back burner of these discussions. Commonly, referred to as wastelands, if at all, and not because they're not having potential, but more or less because they have been unexplored. Yet they are home to 2 billion people on the planet, which is 1/4 of what the planet is now. But also they hold 1/3 of the world's ground cover, and a huge amount of cultural biodiversity. Biodiversity, people, and also resilient communities. So I can go on and on about grasslands, but I think that's not the point. The point is to look at what are we facing in the future? What is this situation leading us to? And one of the things for me, I think is quite important as we go, into the next, decade of action is, how do we then generate science that can support countries to sustainably adopt forest and grassland management? A lot of data already exists on forests, but when you look at grasslands, there's a dearth of data in itself. We need more data, more information that can be absorbed by planners, within the countries, that can be absorbed into policies to strengthen them, to make central the land restoration agenda within these biomes. Nature-based solutions has been talked about, and I will not belabor it as a concept, but the principles that lie behind it really are, how do we make sure that in development, where we are now, that we can be able to implement solutions that move the economy forward, move us forward in that sense, but also protect biodiversity and protect people. For me, I say solutions that don't have people central to them are probably not going to be long-lasting. And then again, one of the bigger topics that we have faced, and I think this is just one that I'll point out, is drought. In this past year, drought has become central to it. And not that because drought itself has no solution, but to me, it is the centrality of land degradation and how that impacts on drought and on biodiversity and also on climate change. So for me, central to it is these discussions must come to the forefront. And I point out a few things, and also from my colleague, I think they pointed out that, within these conventions, the UNFCCC, the CBD, the UNCCD, we need now to move to a more intentional ground where we find ways of working together and bringing the solutions together. Because I believe that in so doing is when we will be able to, one, work effectively and efficiently, but also work across the different sectors and across the board. So a few thoughts from me. Thanks to you. I'll just hand it back to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Round of applause. Thank you. Great. So if we could keep Chris on the screen and bring our other speakers back to the front, and we will have now, we have 20 minutes or so for a panel discussion. So if our panelists or speakers could come back up to the chairs here. And that's wonderful. Veronica. So we've heard a lot about the need for more information. We haven't heard about the centrality of biodiversity in adaptation action. We've heard a lot about correct delivery of information to address adaptation, both at the national level and supported, of course, at the international level across different conventions. IUCN have a clear identification of nature-based solutions, which was adopted this year, last year? This year, wasn't it? So we are moving in the right direction, but I think, as Chris quite rightly said, we need to move with a lot more purpose and a lot more delivery of information into the right places for the adaptation work that needs to be done. So with that in mind, illustrious panel, we have a question. What specific adaptation practices have you seen in regions and countries that also protect biodiversity? What are the results and what networks are enacting these practices? So there's 3 questions, but as we have one microphone, I thought I'd ask them all at the same time and pass the microphone along. But Chris, if you don't mind me coming to you first with your experience, and you talked a lot, of course, about grasslands. Can you perhaps speak to us a little bit about specific adaptation practices you've seen in your country? I think we can have Chris on the full screen. We don't need to see the questions. I'll repeat them. What specific adaptation practices have you seen in regions and countries that also protect biodiversity? What are the results and what networks are enacting these practices? And if I dare add a 4th question, how can the Nairobi Work Programme help facilitate knowledge exchange, either from your own experience or perhaps moving forward, how can we support? So Chris, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And my mind quickly goes to a program that is being implemented in Kenya, Burkina Faso, and Georgia, that is looking at the ecosystem-based responses to drought. Again, drought has become a big issue for us. And just picking up from a very local level in Kenya, there are communities that already know in terms of solutions to drought, and not drought itself as a response and emergency, but what are the ecosystem degradation processes that are happening that they can remedy. And in one of the landscapes, which is in Amboseli, very practical solutions or demillions. I know some of us may be familiar with demillions, creating some micro-catchments within the environment to hold water and to allow for growth of vegetation around that furnishes grazing for the communities, but also restores the functionality of ecosystems. They have been doing this, in Amboseli with good results in terms of increasing productivity over time. Of course, it's not a panacea for everything, but it's working within the environment and they're scaling it up. The one thing that has made it work, one is the fact that the community are really central to the solution. They're the ones who have determined the solution, the science works, and it also works for them. But in addition to that, these kind of practices are supported, through a national emergency drought program that is being enacted in Kenya. So under this Ending Drought Emergencies program, they are coordinating similar processes and similar solutions across the landscapes in the dryland countries of Kenya. So for me, what makes it work? One is, the engagement of local people to find how science meets local solutions. That works. The other thing is, how do you embed it in policies? How do you embed it so that it gets incentives and is supported at that level? So I will leave it at that, and probably my colleagues can also have a chance to come in.
Thank you very much, Chris. Fantastic answer. Veronica, same set of questions. I pass the mic to you, and then so we don't have to ping pong back and forwards, please pass it along the panel as we go. Veronica, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. So I can certainly highlight another finding that we extracted from our paper, the technical brief that we developed that's now a supplement to the NAP technical guidelines. And just wanted to bring out the example of Fiji. We looked at Fiji. And we said, wow, that's amazing. You know, they've really, from the get-go, have really tried to integrate synergies in their NAPs and NBSAPs. And so they've placed a strong emphasis linking their national adaptation plan with national biodiversity and ecosystem protection policies. And they've been also, by the same token, integrating existing climate change strategies into their NBSAP, which is National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. Tristan would be more familiar with those planning instruments. But EBA is also one of the 4 approaches undermining their NAP process. And in their NBSAP, Fiji also places emphasis on EBA, ecosystem-based adaptation, and ecosystem-based approaches to disaster risk reduction as well. So it's a country where we found a lot of really great examples of how they're trying to foster synergies. They're also a part of the Pacific EBA Climate Change Project, or PBAC, facilitating capacity building for EBA in small island developing states. And as part of this initiative, they've been conducting integrated and holistic ecosystem and socioeconomic resilience analyses. And here, what they're trying to do is to identify where there are good options for implementing ecosystem-based adaptation initiatives. So I'll leave it at that. And I'll pass over to Tristan.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for the questions. I'm afraid I'm going to have to deviate slightly because I can't provide an example, I'm afraid. But I just want to talk in sort of in general terms, if that's okay. Well, I've got the microphone now, so I might as well keep going. So, yeah. It would just, what sort of struck me when you were saying those questions, when we look at adaptation and resilience, how exactly is that being quantified? That need for fundamental understanding of how are we actually, or when are we actually achieving sufficient resilience? Are we actually helping communities to adapt to climate change? I came from an event with the Green Climate Fund where I was also asked to talk about how is this important to the post-2020 framework. And one of the interesting things was a researcher who's looking at Green Climate Fund and the GEF and how projects are being submitted to them that are supposedly about adaptation and building resilience. The extent to which they are box ticking by including terms like this, but in actual fact, they are either conservation projects that are trying to bring in climate change because they think they're going to improve their chances of receiving funding, or they're climate change projects that have tried to tack on a bit of biodiversity, a bit of nature, but without the actual fundamental understanding of what does that mean, who's involved, what's the participation of communities and everyone else. But in order for either for the people submitting the projects or the donor themselves, because they want to see this cross-linkage between the various issues, they're just, frankly, ticking boxes. And it's one of the concerns is that actually Chris said it very well earlier when looking at nature-based solutions, that nature-based solutions without people are just doomed to fail. I would argue that it's even worse than that. Attempts to do nature-based solutions without properly considering the people have a huge probability of undermining the very resilience of those communities in the first place. And so, but the thing is, I'm kind of coming back around to my first question of how do we actually measure that we've achieved, that we're actually supporting that resilience capacity, that we're actually helping them to adapt. And unfortunately, I don't really have the answer for that. So your other question about how can the Nairobi Work Programme, what's the role for that? Well, I think this ability to bring experts together and to think about some of these issues, especially when working with parties, with governments, but also at all levels. And how do we make sure that any efforts are not actually, even inadvertently, undermining the very outcomes we're looking for? Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks, Joe, for the questions. I'm going to focus on your last question on how the Nairobi Working Programme can facilitate adaptation action. And earlier today, I was in an event about blue bonds and debt swaps and very innovative financial tools that are going to ocean protection, ocean conservation, and blue economy. And one thing that I think we could do more is connect these initiatives that are being announced here in this part of COP with what's happening on the other side of the COP in the negotiations. And I think we've been talking about strengthening ocean within the formal constituted bodies and negotiation streams and working groups in the UNFCCC. And I think the Nairobi Working Program can have a big role on that. I was just on the Article 6 negotiations right now. They're talking about blue carbon and ocean. So I think there are a lot of entry points. And I think it's not very clear for countries what these entry points are. So I think the Nairobi Working Program it's in a very great position to be bridging these gaps and directing where efforts should be done. I'll stop here.
You gave a really hard questions. But luckily, my first experience with the Nairobi Work Program was in Katowice, and it was the aspect that the distinct value it provides is related to one of these aspects, and this is economic diversification as a response so you can implement adaptation measures. And that's really interesting because touch not only on the diversification, resilience part, but also on the economic advantage of doing some adaptation actions. So that is a very distinct aspect that is easy inside the countries to come to policymakers, to the Ministry of Economy, for example, to the private sector, say, no, this will provide you economic benefits and also some sort of insurance against future extreme weather events or slow onset events. And the experience, I have a couple. One is an update to the presentation we did 4 years ago. The first one is related to a GEF project with Mediterranean communities. And this was operationalized through a clean production agreement in Chile. I work in the institution that does clean production agreements. And this was a community, and was the function of this project was to teach the farmers. This is our community, so it's not big farmers, usually medium, small, or familiar farmers, to do some biodiversity through the way they manage their fields. So changing different types of trees from different stations, doing some capture of the water of the rain, resource efficiency, and that had really good outcomes with this kind of communities that are vulnerable and are not operating at a scale that large plantations. The other example that we presented 4 years ago, and now we have the update, was working on the preservation of native forest. We have Mediterranean forest near the central area of Chile. It's a kind of forest that has some resistance to drought. So Chile has been in a mega drought in the past 10 years. And the problem that we have is there is the economic value of the land. So if we do nothing, there might be they will sell the land and they will turn it into something else. So this was also clean production agreement that it has one, preservation, two, management in a responsible way. So when there is fires, and we have in Chile several fires, they do not have a huge impact. When there was 1 year, you look at the emission of Chile, huge, and was a single fire that Cachonen could be detained, but also the value of the products, transition between low value, so using the wood for food, burning, this is native trees, so it's not any kind of tree or wood, and turn that into other kind of products that have higher value and connecting the people that have this land into the potential buyer was one of the challenges. So we did a small pilot, 3,000 hectares at the time, that was we presented, and it turned out well. So the next time we did 10,000, and now we're starting to replicate the results in other regions. Going to other regions in Chile means you go north or south, so it's not quite the same because the type of tree will change. So you have to address specific challenges when you move inside Chile because of the change of the ecosystem. But yeah, that was a success story that's beginning to gain advantage on the next year. We hope to expand that work as a preservation, but also as an economic advantage to the people that hold these lands.
So thank you very much, panel. A round of applause. I'm going to ask you, I see we've got about 8 minutes, and I'll pass to Coco to close, but I have another awkward question that's not in the agenda, but I like to ask awkward questions once given the floor to moderate. And this is something that came up when I was discussing earlier today ocean rights with colleagues. And I think this is quite poignant to our conversation here, because the parties themselves in the negotiations are very resistant to talking about nature-based solutions, or certain ones are, or ecosystem-based adaptation, call it what you will. And also, you know, this sort of tug of war which is unnecessary between the CBD and the FCCC, because we're all working towards the same thing. So my question to you to think about is, if we brought Mother Nature to the negotiations here, what would happen? What would change? How would things be better? So I'll leave that with you while I acknowledge my Nairobi Work Programme colleagues in the room, Stefan, Jesus, Lily, and a huge thank you to Fatima, who is watching from Nairobi, who's done all the hard work behind the scenes, and admin assistant Geeta, who's back in Bonn, and of course Coco here. So I'm going to pass the microphone. Thank you very much, guys, and they've helped me a lot as we've been sort of juggling things in the run-up to COP. So I'm going to pass to you, Chris, first, to give us your 1-minute answer to that awkward question, and then I'll pass the microphone to the panel.
I was hoping you won't be me first, but here you go. So I think, for me, the one thing, I mean, if Mother Nature was to walk in now into the negotiations, there's no time, yeah? There's no time for us to, take different sides. Soon, she'll be gone. So there's no time. It's now.
Thank you. Right, Veronica, I'll do the same way. Veronica, first to you, and then please pass on.
I actually like that question a lot, because I think that if delegates were to imagine that Mother Nature was at the table, then there would be a case for not just thinking about nature in terms of, how do we use nature as a way to adapt to climate change, right? How do we use nature for disaster risk reduction? Instead, we focus more on the intrinsic value of nature rather than on the instrumental. And we need really practically to find better ways to integrate valuation of nature beyond financial benefits, beyond instrumental values as well, and to integrate ways to consider intrinsic value. So if we could work on that problem, I think we'd go very far. And we could help manage these trade-offs, these really difficult trade-offs that come up when you're thinking about nature-based climate solutions.
Thanks. I agree. I think if Mother Nature was here with us, which I think was kind of where you're going with the question, going with that sort of Gaia concept, she would probably go, what on earth, literally, are you doing? Just how disjointed and disconnected this process is, and ours is too, unfortunately. There's so much work going on over here, so many good examples, so much best practice being talked about, and then completely separately is another group over there talking about similar stuff, but in very different directions. And so, yeah, some sort of way of banging heads together and going, you all need to be connecting somehow. Yeah, good luck to her. Yeah.
I love this question. It will be very interesting to see a negotiator putting one like the main goal on the table without the politics and the games that go behind all of that. And we know with national politics, with economical interests, with all of this, so it would be very interesting to see a negotiator just negotiating for the purpose of COP.
Thank you very much. I'm a negotiator, and I will answer differently that. Yeah, I know everybody will I have the solution and go right away. But the main thing that we do under the UNFCCC is that somebody disagrees with your solution, has different interests, and this is a negotiation process. Of course, we agree with the goals, but where's the equity on the goals and the fulfillment? Who will pay for some of it? And that's the core of the issue. And of course, the way this is designed that everyone has to agree. In a way, when we agree, it's really powerful. But you move at the speed of you leave no one behind. But this is not the only venue for action. So I think it's important to understand what this process is about, but also that this is not the only process that exists that can drive action. It's really nice when something ambitious is coming out of it, because that means that the whole world agree, and that has power like nothing else. But yeah, that this is about. So yeah, of course, I would love to implement all my ideas, but that might mean that somebody is not being listened to. Yeah. Regarding how nature is being, nature-based solutions, actually within the discussion on the TC and the new work plan, somebody opposed nature-based solution because it was not an agreed language. And we searched the draft, the cover decision from the last year, and used, I think, not that different. It was nature and ecosystem, because that was on the decision, and we used that, and we also used the paragraph regarding asking the constituent bodies to work on ocean action. So the way it actually happens is when parties give that kind of guidance, and people make sure that guidance is actually complied with, then you get different constituent bodies or to work on these cross-cutting issues. I agree, it's a very silo approach, having seen all the rooms. For example, you have gender as a negotiation, but genders affect technology, affect finance. We have cross-sectoral gender, technology, and finance. But that, in a way, reflects also how countries are organized between themselves. You have ministries from this, from that, and they also have this kind of issue. So you have like a main driver focus that drives your action, but of course, there always will be some intersection with other. I think that the hopeful message is this: we already have decision on how to introduce nature. There is a need to follow up on that decision, and we as constituent bodies, if somebody else say, oh, keep doing more of that, we'll have to respond to that. But it's there in a way. Maybe not the exact word that you would like, but yeah, you have nature and ecosystem as a focus action, was decided in Glasgow the last year.
Super, thank you very much. And I think lots of food for thought for the Nairobi Work Programme and how we can facilitate in this space moving forward. Apologies, we're running slightly late, and I apologize to Coco, because she has the closing remarks to do. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, panelists. Really much appreciated for your time, online and in the room. And I will pass the microphone to Coco to close.
Thank you, Joe. And I also wanted to point out a couple of things that build on each one of our panelists' thoughts. This is an implementation COP, and I think all of us have to figure out, what does that even mean? Here we're talking about practices to steward nature, to adapt to climate change. And I wanted just to also highlight that we're doing this together. So Joe thanked our wonderful team at home here in Bonn, and I also wanted to thank Habiba and Samir. I'd like to thank other partners from University of Pennsylvania. And the reason why I mention this, and probably actually all of you, it's always risky, also Lily, our climate fellow, working together exactly as you said last, it's taking that we need really big change in a relatively small amount of time. Now, as far as we go, as long as we're alive, we're not going to run out of time. But we want to have nature as much as possible the way we've known it, which is beautiful and thriving. We want to help that regenerate, and that's really a central part of our story in adaptation. And how do we do that? Well, if you look at the conclusions, sorry to bore you now with the conclusions from the Nairobi Work Program, just like you said, once parties decide, if they decide together, there is really great power. So what parties told NWP, and this is going to chart our way forward together with you, is to focus on subregions and to ask what are the practices, which is why we asked you, what are the actual practices? What are the results? And to take that to you as networks. Because what happens with human beings is when you look over to your neighbor and say, well, what are you doing? And how's that working? If your neighbor says, I'm doing this specific thing and it's working great, what are the chances that you'll actually do that much better than if you said, oh, well, here's a book, read this book. That's the power of networks. Also, because we are under time pressure and because nature is precious and we need to steward it, and the ability for nature to regenerate itself is great if we know how to do it. It's really essential also to talk about what's not working well, what the nuances are. You're in a forested area, you're in a grasslands area, you're in a whatever, small island development coastal state. We need to share our practices, and that's the role of knowledge. And we need to share what we're learning, both what's working and what's not working, because that is the way that we can scale up action in a timely way, which means quickly. And as much as possible, avoid massive mistakes at scale. We'll make a lot of mistakes. We'll also do a lot right through the power of something that you were saying, the power of parties working with all of you, our networks, through the Nairobi Work Program. So with that, we have a lot of work ahead. We still have 24, 48, 72 hours here. So just a heartfelt thanks to all of you, our wonderful partners and experts. Good luck to you who are parties, and for the rest of us, good luck supporting the parties, getting across the finish line. Thank you, Joe, and everyone, and have a great night.
Thanks, Coco. And with that, we end. And I wish you a very relaxing evening for those who are not going back into the negotiation table. And if you are, good luck. And yes, the session is now ended. Thank you so much.